And we're continuing with the 7th chapter of Silver on the Tree, which is called Afanc, the name of the monster that tried to get the secret from Jane, which she has now given to Will. But she realized that Will knew that she was in danger before the Afanc came out of the lake. And Will has just explained how he can sense the dark. Could you? Jane said. Oh. Huh? Said Simon beside her. You aren't the only one who knows a few bits of Shakespeare, Will said. What's that one? Oh, just some speech we had to learn last term. The reverberate hills, said Jane. She looked back at the hill that rose behind them now, masking the echo rock. Then she frowned. Will, if you could sense the dark, why couldn't you sense the light? The lady, Will shook his head. I don't know. That was her doing, for her own reasons, I think. I think perhaps there will be a test for each of us before all this is done. Each time different and each time unexpected. And maybe the bearded lake was yours, Jane. Yours on your own. I hope mine isn't like that, Barney said cheerfully. He pointed. Look, the clouds are breaking up. Hints of blue were emerging in the sky to the west. Among the racing clogged clouds, the rain dwindled to a fine sprinkle and was dying altogether now. They went on down the hill, past the small white farm built sturdily on as a fort against winter gales. Through other gates, over the clanking metal pipes of a cattle grid set to keep the wandering Welsh black bullocks within bonds. The happy valley unfolded far below them again, the last low shreds of mist blowing away past the mountains of its further side. Sunshine flickered now and then through the clouds, and the air grew warmer. Jackets were opened and raincoats shaken free of water, as if to give final proof that the rain was over. A small car came humming up the hill past them, bringing the first of the next flow of visitors to wander the hillside, among the sheep droppings and rabbit holes to collect feathers, and the tufts of grayish wool that barbed wire fences grabbed from sheep, and small rough pebbles of white quartz. Will found himself trying hard to remember that he had no right whatsoever to resent these people wandering through the bracken and the heather, the gorse and the hairballs, dropping their cigarette ends on the short springy grass. Seagulls keened in the distance as the track swung round a hill. Suddenly, there ahead, they saw the sea and the broad estuary of the Dovey, with the silver thread of the river wandering through glistening stretches of golden low-tide sand. They all stopped to stand and gaze. Sunshine shafting out from between the clouds sparkled on the river, glimmering on the sandy bar that lay across its entrance to the sea. I'm hungry, Barney said. Now that's a good idea, said Simon. Lunch? Brand said, Rocks to sit on, though. Try up here. They clambered up the slope, edging the track, to the unfenced land where the cattle grazed. Several large black bullocks lumbered reproachfully out of the way. In a few moments they were over the crest of a small ridge, with the track out of sight behind them and the sea and the estuary lying spread below. They perched on humps of slaty rock and fell upon their sandwiches. The wet grass smelt clean, and somewhere a skylark bubbled its long, ecstatic song. High overhead, a small hawk hung in the air. Jane said, looking out over the estuary as she munched, What an enormous lot of flat land there is on the other side of the river. Miles of it, miles and miles, before the mountains can start again. Course, fuck no, Brand said, his strange white hair drying fluffy in the sun. Bog most of it. See the drainage channels, all so straight. Some very interesting plants there are over in that part, if you are a botanist, which I am not. And old things have been found there, a golden girdle with spikes on it, and a gold necklace and 32 gold coins that are in the National Museum now. And there are stumps of drowned trees out there in the sands near the dunes. Some on this side of the river too, on the sands between Aberdovey and Tywin. Drowned trees, Simon said. Sure, Brand said. He chuckled. From the drowned 100, no doubt. Barney said blankly, Whatever's that? Haven't you heard the old story yet, about where the bells of Aberduffy ring all ghostly out at sea on a summer night over there? Masked by the dark glasses that covered his pale eyes once more, Bran got to his feet and pointed out at the mouth of the estuary, all of it sunlit now beneath wider patches of blue. That was supposed to be Canterguelog, the lowland hundred, the lovely fertile land of King Gwendo Garanher centuries ago. The only trouble was that it was so flat that the seawater had to be kept out by dikes. And one night there was a terrible storm, and the seawall broke, and all the water came in, and the land was drowned. Will stood up and came quietly forward to stand behind him. Looking down at the estuary, he tried to keep the excitement from his voice. Drowned, he said. Lost. The mountain was very quiet. The skylark had finished its song. Very far away, once more, they heard gulls faintly crying out over the sea. Bran stood very still without turning. Dear God, he said. The others scrambled to their feet. Simon said, The lost land? I have known that old story always, as well as I know my own name, Bran said slowly. And yet, I never thought. Could that really be it? Simon said. But, Barney burst out, it has to be. It couldn't be anything else. Isn't that right, Will? I think so, Will said. He was trying to stop his face from breaking into a broad, stupid smile. Confidence was running through him like the warmth of the sun. He could feel again, rapidly growing as strong as before, the sense of the high magic all round. It was a kind of intoxication, a wonderful expectancy of marvelous things, the feeling of Christmas Eve, or the new green mist of the trees in early spring, or the first summer holiday sight of the sea. Impulsively, he snatched both arms upward, as if to catch a cloud. Something, he said, talking out his feelings without any thought of what he said. There's something. He whirled about, staring round him on the mountain. Delight was singing all through him. He scarcely knew what the others were. He scarcely knew that the others were there, except one of them. Bran, he said. Bran, do you feel it? Do you... He flapped one hand impatiently as he found he had no words, but then looked and knew that he needed none from the rapt astonishment on Bran's pale face. The Welsh boy, too, turned, looking out over the mountains, out at the sky, as if hunting for something, trying to hear a voice calling. Will laughed aloud to see the reflections of the same indefinable joy that flooded his own mind. Jane, behind them, watching, sensed the intensity of their feeling, and was afraid of it. Unconsciously, she drew closer to Simon, and reached an arm to keep Barney beside her. And chilly by the same instinct, Barney did not resist, but stepped slowly backward, away from Will and Bran. The Drews stood there, three together, watching. And out over the hill, a mile beyond the blue and gold patterning of the estuary, a flickering of the air came, like the quiver of heat that is over a paved road in high summer. At the same time, a whispering music drifted to their ears, very distant and faint, but so sweet that they strained to hear it better, yet could never catch more than a hint of the delicate elusive melody. The quivering air grew brighter, glowing as if it were lit from within by the sun. Their eyes dazzled, but through the brightness they seemed to see a changing out in the estuary, a movement of the water. Although the tide was already low, there seemed to be more sand shining golden now beyond the furthest low tide mark. The waves had stilled. The water had begun to go back, further and further. The white rim of the blue sea withdrew, and the shore rose out of it. First sand, then the glimmering green of weed. But it was not weed. Jane saw incredulously. It was grass. For after it, as the sea fell back and back, there rose trees and flowers and walls and buildings of gray stone, blue slate and glimmering gold. A whole city lay there, growing gradually out of the retreating sea. A live city, with here and there thin strands of smoke rising from unseen fires through the unmoving summer air. Towers and glittering pinnacles reached up like guardians over the flat, fertile land, patched green and gold, stretching beside the mountains and far away at the distant edge of the new land, where the blue of the vanished sea at last began again. They glimpsed a pencil of light standing, a faraway tower gleaming like white fire. Up on the highest ridge of the slope, looking out over the lost land and the city that seemed to govern it, Will and Bran stood together, outlined against the blue sky. They seemed to Jane to be poised there, expectant like musicians, waiting for the first sweep of a conductor's baton. She saw Will raise his head suddenly and look out to sea, and then the brightness that filled the air began to grow again, dazzling, blinding, so that only the faintest outline of the strange land could be seen through it. And it seemed to Jane, as she flinched back, shielding her eyes, that the luminous air drew itself into a shining broad ribbon like a road, stretching from their feet far, far out into the air over the valley, down beyond the mouth of the Dubby River. She heard the sound of music again, lovely and elusive, and she saw Will and Bran step together on the bright road of light and move away over the river, through the air, into the haze and toward the lost land. Her arm tightened across Barney's shoulder, and at her other side she felt Simon's hand touch her own. They stood together in silence. The music dwindled into the sound of gulls crying far away, and the shining road of light faded, and with it the figures that had been walking upon it. And as brightness fell from the air, they saw, looking out over the estuary, no towering city, no new green fields, no thin smoke rising, but only the sea and the river and the low-tide shore, just as they had been in the beginning. Jane and Simon and Barney turned in silence and gathered coats and the remnants of picnic lunches into rucksacks and walked back to the road. And that is the end of chapter 7.